Hello everyone and welcome back to the Sojourning Writer. Today we're going to be continuing the video that we started on Tuesday, where we took a look at creation stories from around the world. As a recap, we went over the biblical creation story, the Greek and Roman creation story, the Egyptian creation story, the Chinese creation story, the Japanese creation story, and the Hawaiian creation story. Today we're going to be going over the Aztec creation stories. There's actually a couple that have been discovered, so we're going to be taking a look at those and finally moving on to a couple of literary creation stories. According to legend, when the Mexica arrived in Anahuac Valley around Lake Texcoco, they considered by the other groups as the least civilized of all. But the Mexica/Aztec decided to learn, and they took all they could from the other people, especially the ancient Toltec, whom they seem to have particularly confused with the more ancient civilization of Tenochtitlan. To the Aztec, the Toltec were the originators of all culture. Toltchiyalt was the synonym for culture. Aztec legends identify the Toltecs and the cult of Quetzalcoatl with the legendary city of Tolan, which they also identified with more ancient Tlaxcalan. Because the Aztec adapted and combined several traditions with their own earlier traditions, they had several creation myths. One of these, the Five Sun, describes 4 great ages preceding the present world, each of which ended in a catastrophe, and were named in function of the force or divine element that violently put an end to each one of them. Xochitl was the mother of Sentan Hutzinhia, or 400 Southerners, her sons, and Kolkaio Kui, her daughter. She found a ball filled with feathers and placed it in her waistband, becoming pregnant with Hutzilpochtli. Her children became suspicious as to the identity of the father and vowed to kill their mother. She gave birth on Mount Kotbek, pursued by her children, but the newborn Hutzipilqushil defeated most of his brothers, who became the stars. He also killed his half-sister, Kolo Zulqui, by tearing out her heart using a Zulkul, a blue snake, and throwing her body down the mountain. This was said to inspire the Aztecs to rip out the hearts of their human sacrifices and throw their bodies down the sides of the temple, dedicated to Huitzilopochtli, who represents the sun chasing away the stars at dawn. Our age, Nuli Ulen, the 5th age, or 5th creation, began in the ancient city of Tenochtitlan. According to the myth, all the gods had gathered to sacrifice themselves to create a new age. Although the world and the sun had already been created, it would only be through their own sacrifice that the sun would set into motion and time as well as history could begin. The most handsome and strongest of the god, Texuchtitl, was supposed to sacrifice himself, but when it came time to self-immolate, he could not jump into the fire. Instead, Nanehultil, the smallest and humblest of the gods, who was also covered in boils, sacrificed himself first and into the flames. The sun was set into motion with his sacrifice, and time began. Humiliated by Nanehultil's sacrifice, Texuchtitl leapt into the fire and became the moon. Next, we're going to be taking a look at literary creation stories. The first one is Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. The Unadil recounts the creation of Arda by the deity Eru, Iluvar. The story begins with a description of Irnir as the children of Iluvar's thought. They were taught the art of music, which becomes the subjects of their immortal lives. The Unar sing alone or in small groups about themes given to each of them by Iluvatar, who proposes a great plan for them all, a collaborative symphony where they could sing together in harmony. Although the Unar embody Iluvar thoughts, they are expected to use their freedom to assist the development of the great plan. The most powerful of the Unar, Melkar, is introduced to the music. Although his loud and vain music disrupts the harmony, Iluvar stands and smiles and raises his left hand to begin a new theme. When Melkar again spoils the second theme, Yulavar raises sternly and raises his right hand to begin a third. Melkar tries to corrupt this theme with volume of his music, but it is powerful enough to prevent him from succeeding. Yulavar ends the music, chastises Melkar, and gives Unar to their thoughts. The deity takes the Unar to see how music at the end of the void created Arda. When the third theme results in the arrival of the children of Unar, elves and men, many Unar want to go into the world to visit them. Although Melkar is the first of the Unar to be named, Ulmo was the first to take action in Arda. Despite Melkar's effort, Ulmo's water cannot be ruined by heat or cold. He and Mene are revealed as the primary agents of the Menvar's plans. Some Unar remain in the timeless halls with Ulaftar. Others go to Arda as the Valar and Minar. The Unar begins to prepare for the arrival of the children of Ulaftar. Melkar repeatedly thwarts their preparations, desiring to rule Arda. Menwe summons the Arnar to resist Melkar, who retreats. When the Valar later assume bodily form, the first war of A begins, but Menwe efforts make the earth habitable for elves and men. So the thing is with Chronicles of Narnia, I didn't want to go into it because it actually is very similar to how Tolkien describes his. And while The Magician's Nephew, which is chronologically the first that take place in the Chronicles of Narnia, it actually shows up later in the series as far as the published works. In this story, in the Chronicles of Narnia, it's actually one of my favorites. What happens is that the main character, Diggory, ends up going into this world through a portal. Now this is after a whole bunch of other stuff happens. Him, a female friend, and the woman who would later become the White Witch actually enter this land, and there's nothing there. It's pretty much just an empty void. But what ends up happening is that while they're there with a couple other people and at least one horse, there was a light that grew, and song and music began to fill that empty world. Come to find out that Aslan is singing creation into existence on this world. So we get to see the whole building up and the whole creation of Narnia as its own world. And through the whole process, not only do we see the building of the world, the lighting of the stars, the sun, time itself being created, but we also see through Lewis's literary work how animals come into being. Now, humans aren't necessarily created in this world, but rather this is a perfect world that humans aren't a part of. But the problem is that because the White Witch was brought into the world, an evil was already introduced before it was even just a few minutes old. It's actually one of my favorite creation stories when it comes to literary devices. There's so few, but I find this one's actually really, really interesting. Cosmere universe was another one. If you're not familiar with Brandon Sanderson, he's actually one of the most prolific modern writers of our time and very clean. So if you have any desire to read some really good in-depth storytelling where the prose is not overburdensome, actually a lot of people would complain that his prose aren't high enough, but I believe he purposely does this, at least in part, that so people have more access to his writings. There was a god, Adonaiism. I don't know if it was a force or a being, though I suspect the latter. When the Cosmere began, there was an entity known as the Adonaiism. This entity was widely believed to have created the Cosmere. Perhaps, for this reason, Adonaiism is sometimes referred to as the power of creation. Investiture was Adonai's power, which led Cosmere scholars to conclude that either investiture seeks intelligence because it used to be Adonaiism, or that Adonaiism came into being because the investiture sought intelligence. The exact nature of Adonaiism, however, remains unclear. It may have been a mere force that acted according to specific rules, or an actual entity that could think on its own. Kreese suspects the latter, the way that Adonaiism saw the Cosmere as simply the way its magic worked. For example, the Spren of Roshiar could not form Fabrils prior to the shattering because of Adonaiism did not want them to be able to do so. Given Adonaiism had this level of control over the Cosmere, some have suggested that Adonaiism may have wanted the shattering to occur. Some say there are subtle forces being manifest in the Cosmere separate from Adonaiism, likely referring to belief in the God beyond. So one of the things when it comes to Brandon Sanderson's stories is while they have a number of different worlds that take place, we have books from the Swordlight archives, we have Mistborn. There are other ones that a lot of these worlds, not all of his worlds happened in the same universe, but a lot of these worlds happened in the same universe, and they all have connections with each other. One of the things that I noticed when looking up different literary creation stories is that the Game of Thrones, one of the bigger fantasy worlds by George R.R. Martin, actually does not have creation stories. Even though it has 3 separate religions, it doesn't have any creation stories for any of these. One of the reasons that I found in comments and forums is that it's possible that George R.R. Martin didn't want to have characters seen as having weird beliefs when it came to the foundation of the universe. Now, that is a speculation by people on forums. I don't know of any hard evidence to why George R.R. Martin did not, but it's something that we need to keep in mind is how we create our stories. It can really impact how our readers are going to feel and connect to the story itself. So say if you have a main character that everybody looks up to, but he has beliefs that are what we would consider pretty ridiculous, it's going to disconnect us from that character. As much as we want to create a more fulfilling world, we need to balance that creating a human or that person and actually create a person that people will actually connect to. Just one of the things you want to make sure you keep aware of is that it's always a good idea to have creation thoughts and creation stories somewhere in the back of your mind so that you can build off of them into a creation, into a world that allows for these people to actually, your characters, to actually live. Every creation story is going to have an impact on how that world plays out. Essentially what you're doing when you're creating a world and a creation story that builds this world is that you're setting up your standard for how that story is going to be played out in the future. So, as always, I will be linking the information that I use in the description below. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, please feel free to put them in the comment section. Until next time, bye.
I am a poor, wayfaring stranger. I'm traveling through this world of woe, yet there's no sickness, toil, nor danger in that bright land to which I